Today I am going to show you how to glaze. Hi, I'm Lisa, the artist behind Lachri Fine Art. I talk all the time about glazing, but I've never really shown you guys exactly how to do that. So today, that is what we are going to do. Now, I thought the easiest way to demonstrate this would be to start with a black and white or two-tone painting and then glaze the color over so you can really see exactly how I'm doing this. You don't need to start with black and white or a two-tone painting before you glaze. Depending on what I'm doing, I will normally just glaze color over whatever it is that I'm working on, but this just made it really easy for you guys to see exactly what glazing does and how it works. If you are working in oil paint, this is going to be done the exact same way. The only difference is where I'm using either matte medium or water in my glazes, you're going to be using your mixing medium. When I work in oil, my mixing medium is liquid. For this demonstration, I'm going to be using both water and matte medium, so you will see how those work. If you are unfamiliar with what glazing is, essentially it's taking translucent paints and thinning them down with water or a mixing medium and just tinting the color over what you already have painted on the canvas. There are some things that I do want to go over with you. First, on mixing with water. If you are using water to thin your paints down like I do, you want to make sure that you don't overdo it. You need to be aware that the more water that you use to thin down your paints, the less adhesive that paint is going to be. Some artists will claim that it's just going to flake off the canvas, it's not going to last. Once it's varnished, it's fine. You really don't have to worry about it. But if you have the paint too thin, when you put that layer down and it dries and you go to glaze on top of it, that first layer comes right off because it's not sticking well. So you do need to get used to the balance of how much water versus how much paint, and that is largely going to depend on which brand of paints that you're using, on the color of paint, because the consistency will vary from color to color. For me, more often than not, I am working in liquitex basics, and that paint I can thin with water and I really don't have many problems with it. But I've seen a lot of cheap paints like Reeves, I don't know how to say it. You add any water to it and it just lifts right off the canvas. The stuff is horrible. So the type of paint you're using makes a difference. The type of canvas that you're using also makes a difference. I have used some canvases that whatever they used to prime it with made it so that paint did not stick well to it. So if I added any water whatsoever to my paint, even with Liquitex Basics, that paint was lifting off when I would apply my next layer. It just was not sticking. So using a quality canvas is a big deal too. In my case, I only use fredrix and I don't have problems with that. Knowing whether or not you want to use water for your glazes or matte medium like I do, or whatever mixing medium you want to try, is going to come down to understanding why glazing does what it does. Let's say I wanted to mix purple paint. I could just mix blue and red together and I've got purple paint, or I could use a pre-mixed purple paint and put it on the canvas. Thing is, that is going to be fairly flat. If I were to put blue and then glaze red over it, the way that the light shines between each of these layers makes a big difference in the depth of the end result. Using water, the colors are closer together when they lay on top of each other. If I use matte medium, which makes the paint much thicker, I end up with a layer where more light is coming through it and actually in many cases will create more depth. But again, that completely depends on what effect you're going for. So this is a case where I would say test out using water, test out using matte medium, and see what works best for you in each case. Now, as far as acrylic paints, if you water it down, it's going to lift off and it's not going to last, it won't be archival. Once you varnish it, it's fine, it's not a problem. A quick note about varnishing, I will do a separate video on this in the near future where I'm explaining how I do this, but just really quick so that nobody messes anything up. When I have used a lot of water in my glazes, I will use a matte spray varnish before I use a painted on varnish. I do it in 2 steps, and this is because I personally prefer gloss varnishes, but to use a gloss varnish and get a large painting covered with it and not have any hot spots and have everything even, it's really difficult. So what I do is just use a matte spray varnish over the whole thing, let it dry, and then I paint on my gloss varnish. If I were to paint on the gloss varnish over paint that I have thinned down quite a bit, that will smudge and occasionally lift some of that paint. So by putting a matte seal over it first, that prevents that from happening. So let's go ahead and get on to the actual tutorial. I'm going to skip through the two-tone portion of this quickly so that we can focus on the actual glazing. Those of you who are Patreon supporters, the Patreon video will be way slowed down for this portion, so you'll still be able to see exactly what I'm doing there. I would have preferred just to use raw umber and white for this, but I was out of raw umber, so instead I used burnt sienna, ivory black, titanium white, and unbleached titanium white. While my end result was still pretty much black and white, it was a warmer black and white than had I just used Mars black and titanium white like normal. In this method with 2 tones is not required for glazing. It is a great technique for ensuring that your values are correct. Good values are very often what's going to separate a well-drawn but flat painting from one that looks very realistic. The great thing with doing this, you can see how accurate I'm able to get my shadows here. I'm able to just focus on the shadows in the light source instead of worrying about color. So again, definitely recommend trying this out if you've never painted with black and white first. Okay, now on to the glazing. I am first going to glaze a yellow and brown tone for my entire background. I am using water for this. I'm slowly adding a little bit more water and then a little bit more water into the paint to thin it out until I get to the consistency that I want. The more water that you add, the more transparent the paint will be, but also the less adhesive it will be, so keep that in mind. One problem that a lot of people have when mixing their glazes is that when they finish thinning out the paint, they go straight onto the canvas with that same brush. The problem is that you will often have thicker paint still in your paintbrush at this point. So to avoid that problem of having areas of glaze come out with spots of heavy globs of paint, you can rinse out your brush after mixing your glaze and then reload it with the glaze before hitting the canvas. All the glaze is actually doing is tinting the color of my background. You can still see my lights and darks I had previously painted, but now I have a nice warm tone over it. This is also going to add a bit of depth because of the way that the light shows through each layer. When I talk about the light showing through each layer, I mean actual light, not light that I've painted. It's something that is really not seen so much in a photo or video, but that you can see when viewing the piece in person. Onto the grapes, I start by mixing a yellow glaze that I paint over all of them. If working in oil, you're going to be using your mixing medium to thin down your paint. With oils, make sure that the paint dries in between layers or glazes, otherwise you're just going to create a muddy mess. Right now, I am still using water for this glaze. For either oil or acrylics, if you are using a mixing medium to thin down your paint, you don't have to worry about the adhesiveness like you would when mixing with water. Then, if using the mixing medium and you go too thin, the color just won't show up, so not a problem there. Once I get all of my grapes painted with a yellow, I let that dry and then start working in with a magenta and red glaze over those grapes. Why didn't I just use that color mixed in with my yellow and save a step? Because layering like this allows for the light to shine through each layer and create more depth in the finished piece than if I just painted it one solid color. Notice that as I'm adding this magenta and red glaze, I am not covering up all of the yellow on the grapes. I want some of that yellow to show through. After going over all of my grapes this way, you can see that the dark areas I had originally painted in black and white still show through. This is a very translucent paint and it is not going to cover all of that up completely, which is a good thing. I want those values to show through. I use my mop brush just to smooth out any brush strokes in my glaze. This will not soften the edges because that paint is already dry. Only the inside of each glaze that is wet is going to be affected by this. When you glaze, it is going to work best if you are using colors that are already translucent. If you try and glaze with a color that is more opaque, like titanium white, you're pretty much just going to create fog. More often than not, this is not the look you are going to want. On my third layer of this glaze, I want to lighten up some of the yellow areas, so I'm using a transparent mixing white with some of my yellow. There will be times when I work like this that I am going to want opaque colors and I'm not glazing. This isn't a situation where every layer needs to be a glaze. It's going to be completely dependent on what you're trying to achieve. After glazing 2 more layers of my red and magenta mix, I'm going to use my transparent mixing white to create the lightest areas of my grapes. I'm mostly dry brushing to get this look. Dry brushing is not something that I do often, but it does work in this case. I'm using a brush that has no water or mixing medium in it and almost very lightly brushing that nearly dry paint onto the canvas. This white that I'm adding to the grapes isn't a typical highlight caused from the light source hitting them, so I want to make sure that these areas maintain a very random look and shape. You don't want to just throw white on the same area of each grape. It won't look natural at all. Once I cover each grape with that random bit of transparent white, I'm going to go over some of these latter areas with titanium white. This is an opaque white. Now I want that more opaque white. I am not mixing a lot of water or mixing medium with the white at this stage because I really do want it to stand out more. As always, it's important not to get too carried away with your white. You don't want many areas of the painting to be white. I'm now going back through with my magenta and red to darken up a few of these areas. At this point, I've switched from using water to matte medium as my mixing medium. I wanted the paint to go on a little bit thicker, but still be quite transparent, so the matte medium was the better choice for this portion. The cup is done in the same way as I did with the grapes with glazing. I'm glazing brown over my shadowed area and then blue for the blue portions. I then use a transparent mixing white to pull out some of the highlights on the cup. I hope this helps you guys out in understanding what I'm talking about when I talk about glazing. My general rule is the more the better. Most of my paintings have 10 to 20 glazes on any given area. Thanks for watching. If you are supporters over on Patreon, make sure to head over there where I've got the slowed down 1-hour version of this video available for you now without the audio, so that you can see more easily exactly what I'm doing. If you're new to my channel, I have new video critiques every Tuesday where I'm critiquing your original paintings or drawings, my own speed paintings, drawings, and tutorials every Wednesday, social media tips for artists each Thursday, and artist vlogs every weekend. So if you haven't already, I would love for you to subscribe, and you can follow me on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, Tumblr, Google+, all those social media sites. Links are below in the video description to keep up with news, my newest work, and see real-time clips of whatever it is I'm currently working on. I'll see you guys tomorrow for the social media vlog. Becca, what are you doing? Grapes are bad for dogs. Even if they are painted, you can't have them.